Go. And we are live. Good morning, everybody. It's Friday, the last Friday in October. Wow, this month is flying. Jose and I were just talking about Halloween, and his little grandson is dressing up for a party and all those type of fun things. So it's a neat time of year. The leaves on my maple trees in my yard were beautiful red, Jose, and they fell here this week. I tried to get most of the leaves up before they fell, but we had a big windstorm, and all the leaves kind of fell at once. And my neighbors are now the beneficiary of my leaves. So I'm sure they're not too happy with me. Good morning, everybody. This, of course, is the Food Safety Chat Live. Every Friday on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, we go live, and I bring in a special guest, and we talk about a food safety topic. And one of the things that you'll notice with this conversation is this is not a presentation. This is a discussion. And we want your questions, and we want that interaction. It makes this so much fun. And anybody who's been watching this on a regular basis is familiar with my guest today, of course, the illustrious Jose Sabal. Jose, how are you doing today? Oh, we lost your sound. I can't hear you. Can you hear me, Jose? I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Oh,
what about now?
Hey, there you are. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I was saying thank you very much for that great introduction. Here in Florida, we are arriving into the time of the year when we're going to get freezing temperatures frequently. Because we already have been below the 70s one or two times.
Well, here at night, it's getting to the real freezing point. And so here we have to have our sprinklers blown out and all those good things. And my assistant, Renee, has joined us here. Good evening, Renee. Renee is in the Philippines, so my assistant is on the other side of the world. And so it's very generous of him to join us for this, so we appreciate that. So one of the things that we like to do on this is let us know where in the world you are. So Jose is by Miami. I'm in Loveland, Colorado, which is kind of north of Denver. And I'm always amazed the number of people from around the world who join us for this food safety chat, which is amazing. So we really appreciate that. Today is a really interesting topic around standards and all these types of things, and we'll get into those in a little bit. But first off, one of the things we want to do with this is our ritual with this, right? And so everybody, please, Elise, good to see you, my friend. Everyone, as we start here, please grab your favorite beverage. I prefer coffee. Jose prefers his tea in his lovely flower glass. So please join us for a drink of beverage. Very good. I always like my morning coffee. Get those antibodies in your system going.
Oh, yeah.
Someone in Miramar, so not too far.
Oh, that's me.
Oh, it just says LinkedIn user.
Yes.
There it is. There's your name.
Why my name is not showing there?
Interesting. That is kind of weird. So one of the things that's kind of cool here with the food safety chat as well is we now have a sponsor, Jose. So we're moving up in the world. So we are sponsored by EAS Consulting Group, which is a consulting group based in the Virginia, DC area that has consultants all around the world in the US. And they work with independent consultants like me. And they work with companies then to help solve issues. And they have over 100 consultants who work with them just in the food area. And the average, Jose, of the experience of the consultants in that group is over 20 years of experience in the industry. So it's just amazing what these guys know. One of the consultants who works is Charles Breen, and he used to work with FDA. And he worked with FDA. He was a district director. He was there for over 40 years. So, I mean, being able to tap into expertise like that is really amazing. So I wanted to say thank you for EAS to supporting our chat today. And we'll have some other messages here through our conversations for EAS and some special offers too. So that's all good. So I'm really excited about that. So today's topic, Jose, is something that is really interesting, right? And it's standards and the differences between standards. And one of the questions you and I get a lot from clients when they're asking about standards and how they need to do things is, a lot of times, in almost all situations, plants need to be certified to more than one standard. So if you're in the US or you're importing into the US, you have the Food Safety Modernization Act to comply to. You have regulatory requirements. You may have low acid canned food requirements, right? All of these different systems. And then on top of that, you also have voluntary standards, third-party certification. So Global Food Safety Initiative, ISO, FSSC, all these type of things. And people, Jose, will ask us, well, do I need different systems for all of these different things? And our answer is always no, absolutely not.
Nope.
If anything, they should all be the same. And one of the sayings that I have in systems building is simple is hard, right? You need to really, really understand what you're doing so you can create an elegant, simple system that meets the requirements and everybody uses. And it's not this giant collection of documents that sit on a shelf, right? Nobody wants that. That's a waste of time. And so today's topic is really then a comparison and looking into GFSI and what ISO is saying and what Codex is saying and kind of weaving that in with what regulations are saying. So there's a ton of things to go over here today, Jose. So you're one of the best people I know for figuring out and making these things simple. So I'm really excited to what you have to say around these systems today. So let's dive in.
Okay. So look at this, Bryan. Everything started a few years ago. I was in the last SQF conference when I heard that anyone that is taking preventive control for human food that is not a Hazap-based risk approach. And I said, oh my goodness, but this is weird. Why they're saying no? This is totally strange because even during the class and the presentation and everything, we know that the FDA is using the food safety principles. So I was saying, why this is not a Hazap-based system? Actually, in my mind, I went to the glossary of the SQF, and the definition for Hazap-based includes a training that is used as a typical training in the country of manufacturing, something like that. And I said, well, anyone that is manufacturing food that is not seafood, juice, or anything that is regulated by USDA FSIS, the International Hazap Alliance Hazap training, is basically regulated by the Preventive Control for Human Food. So I'm going to use a very simple example. I'm making cookies, okay? The regulation for me is the Preventive Control for Human Food, period. And again, no matter how people approach this, if the company is not in full compliance with the regulation applicable to them, that is a prohibited act by law. Even look at this one, even if you got 100 in your BRC audit, in your SQF audit, in your FSSC audit, or your IFS audit, or whatever GFSI standard you have in place. Okay? There are many examples. You guys can go online and you will see companies that were doing very good and they got a warning letter from the FDA.
Right.
So take a look at this and think about this. If they're doing very good in a GFSI standard, why they got a warning letter? That's a very simple question. And the answer, my friends, and this is something, Bryan, that we have discussed many times here, is that the regulation in all of those GFSI schemes are not exactly the same. They are very similar in most of the aspects, but they are not the same. So last week, I was attending to the annual FDA FSPCA conference. And there was this great person I really admire, this gentleman, Glenn Bass.
Oh yeah.
He is the head of the Office of Regulatory Affairs of the FDA. He's basically responsible for enforcement of the regulations, period.
Mhm.
Okay. And during the conversation and all the sharing of the knowledge in the state or how the regulations are right now, etc., we went through a section of the conference where there was a discussion, and seems like the manual and all the class for preventive control for human food is going to change
Mm.
because you're going to adapt the language and everything that is in the regulation to Codex Alimentarius.
Oh.
So it can be recognized as a GFSI, as a Hazap-based class. And I said, what is this? Already the regulation, as it is right now, it's already Hazap-based. Because if you go, and this is my first citation for the introduction, if you go to the ISO, but it's not ISO, it's hold on, let me look for the right name here. IEC slash FDIS 31010, which is an ISO document. Between you and me, it's an ISO document.
Mhm.
That document indicates that HACCP, it's one of the risk assessment techniques. HACCP is not a system. It's just a technique to determine risk within a system.
So it's a tool. It's a tool you use. Mm.
That's exactly right. So what I did, and this is our conversation a few days ago, is I went deep into the intent of ISO, GFSI,
Codex?
ISO, GFSI, the Codex Alimentarius, and the regulation.
Mm.
Looking for definitions and looking for the intent in the different 7 principles of Codex Alimentarius to see if that matches with the regulation as it is right now. So now look at this. I'm going through basically, the summary that I created. SQF is by default a system, okay? FDA, the responsibility of the preventive controls qualified individual is to develop and implement a system, and is written as part of the definition of the regulation, like that. Okay. So the FDA and the SQF are asking people to develop systems. So if they are asking systems, we need to go to the source of anything related with systems, which is ISO.
Mm.
Okay. And for this conversation and this opinion, I use ISO 9000, and I went to ISO 9000 looking for the definition of system. And a system is basically, and I'm reading straight from the document, a set of, and look at this, interrelated and interacting elements. Okay, so now we know that if we are using the 7 principles of HACCP, that the use of that technique, the HACCP technique and the 7 principles, is just one element in a system by definition. Now, there is a note. Oh, sorry. There is the next definition is risk, and risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty. Very weird definition. But there is a note number 1 that says the effect is a deviation, which could be positive or negative.
Mm.
And the uncertainty is just the consequence and the likelihood. So that is the risk assessment.
Mm.
Okay. And then by looking at ISO 31010, the ISO document 31010 for the risk assessment techniques, I went to B7, which is the hazard analysis and critical control points technique, not system. And there is a sentence there. I pulled several sentences, but I selected one especially because it says Hazap aims to ensure that risks are minimized by controls. So you know that anyone that is using Hazap is basically a tool to determine risk of a hazard and then setting up proper controls.
Mhm.
Okay, now I went then into GFSI benchmarking requirements 2020. That's the last one. And over there, I went to the glossary, which is in part 4 of the GFSI requirements, benchmarking requirements. And it says the definition of HACCP, look at this, hazard analysis and critical control point, a system. So in GFSI, they are defining HACCP as a system.
Ah.
And we know that that is not right.
Hmm.
A system, a system in food is going to be using HACCP as a way to determine risk for hazards. That's it. So very interesting definitions here. So a system which identifies, evaluates, controls, and monitors hazard related to food safety as specified by the Codex Alimentarius. So GFSI is saying, well, if you guys are going to set up a HACCP system, you need to go to Codex Alimentarius. That is the original source of this information.
Right. Yeah, and that's been very consistent, right? They always reference back to Codex.
Now, Codex Alimentarius. And what we need to be very careful is that the last change to the Codex Alimentarius, Bryan, the one in August of 2020, oh my goodness, they basically, in my opinion, I might be wrong, but in my opinion, Codex Alimentarius is basically copy and paste from the intent of the preventive controls regulation.
Oh.
Copy and paste. It's not copy and paste, but the intention, you can see that is there.
Wow.
So going there, you are going to see that it has a plan in GFSI, the new version, definitions. Has a plan is documentation or set of documents prepared in accordance with the principles of HACCP. What are the principles of HACCP? ISO 31010. Okay? To ensure that control of significant hazards in a food business. Oh, that's perfect. Because that is exactly the same intent in the regulation in 21 CFR 117.
Wow.
Even though that the definition is not a HACCP plan, it's a food safety plan, which is a new name. 21 CFR 126, the food safety plan. And then in Codex Alimentarius, a HACCP system, look at this, they do understand systems because Codex Alimentarius is basically connected with ISO. So now the definition of a HACCP system, according to Codex, is the development of a HACCP plan, the documentation, and the implementation of all of the procedures. That is by definition a system.
Uh-huh. Of which HACCP is a tool.
There you go. So now look at this. When I was searching for those definitions, something, came out to light. When going through that, I saw the definition of a deviation according to Codex. And I'm going to read it to you because it's amazing. It's exactly the same definition as in the preventive controls. It's a failure to meet, and look at what it says, a critical limit or to follow a GNP.
Or to follow a GMP.
Yes. So any deviation in a GNP that is linked to a hazard is already a deviation, like a deviation in a CCP. What is that? That is preventive controls. Because now, like the regulation says, anything in your GNPs that may pose a hazard should be addressed as other controls, as defined in 117, 135, what is that, B6 or something like that, the other controls. And it's there. It says that anything in the GNPs could be I'm going to say upgrade it to a preventive control if it's actually controlling a hazard. And for those of us, those of our audience today, you may remember the example of the blueberries. So I was helping this company, and it's in the US. They are importing blueberries. I went to the FDA recalls. Hepatitis A is associated with fresh blueberries. So
Mhm.
now the guys that are in Argentina packing the blueberries, is it possible that there might be an inclusion of hepatitis A into those products? Yes. Is hepatitis A hazard? Yes. But how do we control hazards in a food safety system? Oh, because in the GNPs, we have 117.10 personal and A is disease control. Well, hold on, because disease control now just became a hazard. So under the regulation and also under the new version of the Codex Alimentarius, that should be upgraded to a preventive control. By definition.
Wow, this is a lot to
Shocking.
process.
Yes, this comparison, when I was doing this, I say, oh my goodness. I mean, it makes sense. You go to the intent and it makes sense, but it's a lot because the new version, in my opinion, the new version of the Codex Alimentarius is basically linking the new Hazap based approach with the preventive controls.
So, are we seeing with this the merger of these two worlds, the regulatory world and the standard world? Are these
You know
are these
what,
coming?
Bryan? I don't think that people are going to get together and say, hey, you know what? We're going to set up a universal standardized approach for food safety. I just don't see that happening.
Right.
But you know what? At the end, Bryan, we as the, well, we're consultants, but it doesn't matter. We as the one managing food facilities, manufacturing food, we are responsible for developing the system that we need for our food, for whatever we are producing. And it is in our best interest to make sure that we do that in a way that we satisfy all of the requirements.
Mm.
And at this point, I'm going to say GFSI requirements, whatever is the scheme that you're using, being BRC, FSSC, SQF, IFS, whatever that is. And also making sure that we understand and we develop this system by the intent and not by the word written in those requirements.
Which all gets down to, in your system is control of risk.
Basically, yes.
Mm.
So before getting, and of course, I'm going to say that this is my last note here to last bullet point. If you go to the Codex Alimentarius, principles of hygiene, what is the full name? Principles of food hygiene, and it's the CXC 1969, exactly the document that we're supposed to be using. If you go there, that document is divided in two chapters. Chapter number 1 is the good handling practices. This is the GMPs for us. And chapter number 2 is the HACCP principles.
Mm.
Okay. Now, I would like to go back for a second to something that we really need to understand. Okay. And is this. Let me go to FDA,
Mhm.
Preventive Control for Human Food Regulation.
Right.
So what you guys are going to see right now is an explanation on how to match, which was my intent, how to match the 7 principles as explained in the Codex Alimentarius with the 7 principles as organized in the regulation. That's what I did. Okay. And we need to be clear on one thing. The scope of the FDA and the scope of the Codex Alimentarius is the same. What is that? Is the prevention of, according to FDA language, adulteration and misbranding of the products. According to Codex Alimentarius language, the prevention of contamination of the products. Okay, but we need to be very clear on one thing, Bryan, and this is when we keep on reading the regulation and you keep on reading Codex Alimentarius. when a product is adulterated branded, and I'm going to use FDA language because I know that Codex Alimentarius is the same. By default, according to the law in the United States, that is a prohibited act, and that carries criminal consequences.
Right.
Okay. Actually, I attended to Melanie Newman's presentation yesterday in SQF conference, and she was basically repeating exactly what I'm showing here right now. One of the things that she said, and everybody was basically shocking because of that, is the definition of insanitary conditions. Because any one of us working under insanitary conditions, that's it. The product is adulterated. And the FDA don't cares if the product contains something that is something that will make the product adulterated. The fact is that the companies are working under insanitary conditions. That's what is important for the regulation. So, according to that regulation, and I put this statement here, a product could be adulterated, which is prohibited by law, is a criminal act. A product could be adulterated if it contains a piece of hair, which is not going to cause illness or injury, or if the product contains salmonella, to say something. That's very interesting, and that's something that we all need to understand. Because SQF, when you got your auditor going into your facility and maybe someone is not properly wearing the hairnet, the auditor is going to raise a minor nonconformity.
Yeah.
But if the FDA shows up and actually the product is exposed and people are not properly wearing hairnets, those are going to be insanitary conditions, and your product is going to be contaminated with filth. That is exactly how it is written in the regulation. And at that point, the product is adulterated, and that is a criminal activity. It's prohibited by law.
That's a significant raising of the bar.
Huge raising of the bar. But that's how the regulation has been written, Bryan, since 1937, 38. Because there is no change. The law has not changed in that aspect, in the definition. So look at this. For the last few minutes that we have, let's go through the comparison. So let me explain the methodology that I used. So I grabbed the Codex Alimentarius, chapter number 2, with all of the 7 principles, and I grabbed the regulation. And I just wrote everything that is in the Codex Alimentarius for each of the 7 principles. And then I start looking into the regulation to see if the intent match. I'm not looking for the word by word. I'm just looking at the intent. So in Codex Alimentarius, we have principle number 1. Codex Alimentarius says, principle number 1, conduct a hazard analysis and identify control measures. Hazard analysis, and this is in quotes because I copy and paste. Hazard analysis consists of identifying potential hazards and evaluating these hazards to determine which of them are significant, that is Hazap language, for the specific food business operation. And I said, okay, that's basically the definition. Let's go into the regulation. So 21 CFR 117.30, hazard analysis. In A1, it says, you must conduct a hazard analysis to identify and evaluate based on experience, illness data, scientific reports, and other information, known or reasonably foreseeable hazards. And this is something, Bryan, that as you can see, there is difference, but that difference is not by intent. What is the difference here? The difference is that in Codex Alimentarius, we are supposed to identify potential hazards. That's it. In the preventive controls, we're supposed to identify known or reasonably foreseeable. So in the preventive control regulation, we have two different types of hazards. The known, which is equivalent to the potential, and the reasonably foreseeable because of misuse, because a consumer that was not supposed to be consuming that is consuming that, and so on. The raw cookie dough, you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's, reasonably foreseeable hazard. Why? Because there is evidence that people is not consuming that product according to the instructions in the package. The product is raw, it's supposed to be cooked. People is not cooking that. Okay, so that is a deviation. That is a reasonably foreseeable hazard. Now, intent. Is the intent in Codex Alimentarius different from the intent of the FDA just because the FDA defined known or reasonably foreseeable? And the answer is simply no. You know why? Because for Codex Alimentarius, the contamination of the product is not acceptable. And it doesn't matter if it's a known or a reasonably foreseeable. So if we go back to the intent and we fully analyze those two documents and compare, there is no difference. And he keeps on saying, where is that package at your health? Determine whether these hazards require a preventive control. The known or reasonably foreseeable if they require a preventive control according to the risk assessment that is being performed according to principle number 1 of the Hazap. So they connect, they match. The hazard analysis must be written, says the regulation. That is not in Codex Alimentarius. B, the hazard identification must consider known or reasonably foreseeable hazards, and the regulation says you need to look into the biological, chemical, and physical hazards.
Yeah, I'm trying to think as it's swirling around in my head here of examples. And so John had a request here, Jose, is could you post these references? So, I mean, there's a lot of material here. So maybe the easiest way to do this is to email Jose. His email is on here and he can get you those references. I don't know, unless you want to type all those in there. I don't know. It's a lot of material.
Yes. But you know what? Yes, we can do this. Jonathan or John, send me an email and I'll get back to you with the names of all of those references. So let me keep on going. Okay, what's your question?
So I'm trying to think of an example. So let's take a hazard analysis of an ingredient. So something that's let's say chocolate, right? Something that's well known, right? And so there are known risks that occur with chocolate. So let's say salmonella,
yes,
right? You need to be taking that into occurrence. Let's say you may have also risks with potentials for heavy metal in chocolate and things like this. So what would be the difference? Is there any difference between these different approaches that we're talking about, Jose? I'm trying to bring this back down to a quality manager in a plant who is working on his food safety plan.
There are very fine differences in the way that the requirements are written, Bryan, but the intent behind those written statements is exactly the same. There is no difference. That's what I found. Look at principle number 2, Bryan. So principle number 2, anyone that is reading the old version of the Codex Alimentarius, you go, you need to determine the critical control points, CCPs. And in quotes, because I'm pulling these copy and paste, critical control points are to be determined only for hazards identified as significant hazards as a result of your hazard analysis. And, all of us, just by taking Hazap, we know that is the intent. Briefly, I'm going to the preventive controls regulation. Okay, and the preventive control regulation, which is why a lot of people are saying that they're not the same, says 21 CFR 117.135, we're supposed to look for preventive controls. So what is the main difference here in words is that a critical control point is a step of the process where you are going to implement a control measure. In the regulation, when you go to 117.135, a preventive control is the control measure. The regulation is asking you to develop a control measure and then put that control measure in place in, number one, process preventive controls, which is equivalent to a CCP, is one step of your flow chart. However, you may put those controls as an allergen preventive controls, which we already have CCPs for allergens. However, what is the difference here? The difference is that the CCP for allergens for 99% of the population is going to be the labeling of the product, which is a step of the process. Now, is that the only way that you prevent the inclusion of allergens or prevent cross-contamination? No, because scheduling is how we eventually prevent cross-contamination. How we normally address that? Oh, that is part of production. So may not even show up as a quality control step, as a quality control activity. Is part of the production. So eventually the scheduling may fall outside of the scope of the food safety plan, but it's a control for prevent cross contact. Maintenance, cleaning and sanitation. How do you fit all of those things into your program? Well, you need to bring them in from the GNPs and convert them into preventive controls. You need to upgrade those activities, those procedures into preventive controls, which are going to be very easy to monitor. It's not a big deal, but you need to do that. Why? Because they are controlling. They are actually controlling is a very generic word. The intention is to prevent cross contact of allergens. And then you have the sanitation preventive controls. Why?
Right.
Because at some point you want to prevent cross contact of allergens, or you want to prevent adulteration of the product because of environmental hazards. In the old version of the Codex Alimentarius, that was addressed in the good handling practices, chapter number 1. But now look at what is written here. So the first one that I have here is a critical control point. It's exactly the same as a process preventive control. So no big deal.
Okay.
It's there. For the second one, allergens, Codex Alimentarius added the definition of cross contact to their standard. So they're matching, again, the US regulation. And it says in section 511 of the, this is, where is that? This is chapter number 1. So this is a good handling practice of the GNPs. Section 511 says, cleaning should remove food residues and dirt, which may be a source of contamination, including allergens. And section 513 says monitoring. Oh, monitoring? That is principle number 4. And effectiveness, that is principle number 3, because we're defining what is acceptable and what is not. That is exactly the definition of effectiveness. Indicates, and I'm quoting, application of cleaning and disinfection procedure should be monitored for effectiveness and periodically verified. What Codex Alimentarius is telling you, my goodness, use the Hazap approach. It's a hazard. So again, is the Codex Alimentarius citing the FDA regulation? Of course not. But the intent is already there. Okay, and I'm not going to read anymore because we're getting close to, and I want to finish. So for the sanitation, you go again to the section 5 of Codex Alimentarius, and it says, to establish effective systems that monitors the effectiveness of cleaning and disinfection, pest control, waste management procedures. So again, it's not just about cleaning and sanitation. It's about anything that may has the possibility to adulterate the product, to contaminate the product.
Right. And that sounds to me, as you're reading through that, Jose, that sounds like verification to me.
It's verification, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. So then we have the supply chain preventive controls. And in Codex Alimentarius, section 728 says incoming materials. The documentation describes the requirements for the ingredients and raw materials received, as well as the responsibilities of the suppliers. And I'm quoting, supplier quality assurance activity, such as audits. Oh my goodness, audit is a verification activity in the regulation.
Yeah.
Is one of the verification activities of a supply chain preventive control. May be appropriate for some ingredients. Yes, those that you are going through in your hazard analysis and you identify that your supplier is actually finding a hazard and they are controlling that. They match perfectly. By intention, they match.
So back to the salmonella example in the chocolate, right? Who is controlling the hazard?
Yep. And then remember that we do have the recall program is a preventive control by default if we identified at least one hazard that requires a preventive control in the hazard analysis. So in section 7.5 of Codex Alimentarius, recall procedure, it says procedure should enable the comprehensive, rapid, and effective identification and removal from the market by the involved food business operator and or return to the food business operator by the consumers of any food that may pose a risk to public health. What is that? A hazard? Of course, but they match perfectly.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Well,
The
let me
words
ask
are
you this.
different, but it's amazing, Bryan.
So we're talking a whole lot about preventive controls and how these all match up. I haven't heard use of the word prerequisites. So how are those? I mean, so my standard, the traditional way of looking at this in the US is you have your prerequisite programs. So your supporting systems, right? Your training and your GMPs and blah, 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 that support your preventive controls.
Yes.
How do you, what's your take on that now with these different documents? What are they saying about that?
You know what, Bryan? What is amazing? Because of this engineering background that I have, in my mind, I do not separate anything in the regulation in GMPs and hazards. Okay. I'm going to be using the same approach with the same risk assessments for everything. The only thing, watch this, the only thing is that I'm going to use what is already written in the regulation. So what is a prohibited act? Oh, adulteration. What is the definition of adulteration? That is actually in 117.1, the scope of the regulation. It says, if you guys are working under insanitary conditions, your products are adulterated. But if you keep on reading, it says that if your product is contaminated with filth, and I'm going to add Jose Zabal's quote after that, I'm going to use the GMPs to control filth. And the regulation goes and says, or whereby your products may be rendered injurious to health, that is a hazard, and I'm going to control that with the food safety plan. So if you look and try to connect everything from laws, from regulation, from Codex Alimentarius, basically filth is going to be controlled with the GMPs. And if for whatever reason in your GMPs, your actual procedures are not enough to control something that is considered a hazard for your food safety plan, you are going to add that hazard to your hazard analysis and convert that into a, I'm going to say, critical control point slash GHPs according to Codex Alimentarius, or according to the US regulation, you are going to make that other controls, which are allowed by regulation.
So we come full circle back to the beginning.
Back to the beginning. Principle number 3, 21 CFR 117, 135C1A. Parameters associated with the control of the hazard, maximum and minimum. That is exactly principle number 3. Principle number 4, oh, you need to establish a system for monitoring. 21 CFR 145, monitoring. You must establish and implement written procedure. Exactly the same.
Yep.
Principle number 5, corrections and corrective actions. 21 CFR 117-150, corrective actions and corrections. Well, you may change the order, but it's exactly the same thing. Principle number 6 in Codex Alimentarius, validate your Hazap. Look at this. They start by telling people that they need to validate the controls, and then there is another section for the verification. Well, if you go to the regulation, 21 CFR 117-160, the validation of your controls, and 117-155, the verification of your control by doing what? Verification is an enclosure of all of the activities that will be recognized as verification procedure for all of the controls in our system. So there is a list of validation, verification of monitoring, verification of the corrective actions, verification of implementation and effectiveness, which is calibration, accuracy check, sampling, and testing. The reanalysis, the audit of the entire system is a verification by default. Well, all of that is exactly the same in Codex Alimentarius. By reviewing monitoring records, confirming that the CCPs are kept under control, reviewing corrective actions. I can keep on reading this, and it's exactly the same. And principle number 7, record keeping, 21 CFR 117.190 is the specific requirement in the regulation for record keeping of the preventive controls. And if you go to subpart F of the regulation, the FDA kind of goes above those basic requirements and say, well, the structure of your procedures must be this. And you know what? They perfectly match.
And you know, it's interesting, Jose. So when you're dealing with a whole lot of detail like this, right, it's always, number one, it's always really helpful to think of these concepts, dive into them, swim around, play with them, look at the references, but then always come back to the higher level, right? And say, okay, what does this mean, right? Because if you spend all your time down in the detail, you get lost, right?
Yes.
So you always have to bring it back up and say, okay, what does this mean in relation to my food safety plan? What does this mean in relation to my GFSI certification and these type of things? And at that higher level, as you're talking about this, what's going through my mind, Jose, is plan, do, check, act.
Oh, yes, 100% with you.
Right.
Yeah, at the end, that's everything. And one thing, Bryan, plan, do, check, act is connected with systems, not with Hazap. Hazap is a methodology to determine risk in your operations. The system is what needs to be using the plan, do, check, act approach.
Yes. And I'll take this up another level, right? What are one of the things with this, right? So you develop a system for these purposes and these intents to prevent and protect food safety and filth and adulteration and misbranding and these type of regulatory standards. Now link this back to what FDA is talking about with culture. Systems, right? This is all systems.
Yeah.
Right? And they're saying you need to develop a system. And then so they're all kind of aligning around this language.
Yes.
Yeah, and so Thiago here said, it seems that intentions are the same, but efforts differ.
I agree with you, Thiago. But you know what? If the intent is the same, the effort should be the same.
Yeah, they should align. Yeah, I mean, and I think maybe his point here too is right. There's different paths up the mountain, but you need to understand the path, right? And I think that's what we've been talking about today, right? And there's significant changes in how that path is being constructed.
Yeah.
And we need to understand those, right?
You know what, Bryan? The goal. I mean, one of the most important things when you develop a system is to understand exactly what is your goal, what is the scope, what is the reason why you are developing that system. Because systems, and this is something that we have discussed in other conversations before, the purpose of a system is to achieve consistency. On what? For any food safety system, that consistency is going to be based on the prevention of adulteration and misbranding, because those are prohibited acts in the law. Right. That's a scope. So anything that you do, pest control, cleaning, sanitation, maintenance, hand washing, the food safety plan, and everything. What is the reason? The prevention of adulteration and misbranding of the products.
Yes. Heavy. Heavy topic
Oh
for
my
Friday.
goodness, it was great. I enjoyed doing this investigation.
Thank you, Jose. You are amazing. To be able to bring all this together, thank you very much to give us an understanding of this. This is huge. And I mean, to John's point, right, there's a lot of information, a lot of data we're talking about here. So please, Jose's email's on there, jose.sabal@sabalfsc.com. I mean, as you can tell, right, nobody better than Jose for understanding these concepts. So please reach out to him. And as we're closing here today, I wanted to also then bring up again, thank you to my sponsor, EAS Consulting Group, and helping to bring this content to you. And there's something here pretty cool that I want to show you, Jose, that I can do now. So first off, if you want to reach out and learn more, look at that, about
that's nice.
what EAS does is you can go to their website and check them out, right? EASconsultinggroup.com/services/foods. They also do medical device and other areas too. But if you use this link, you can go right to the food area. And if you use, look at that, getting fancy. if you want to take a training course, right? Because I think today really demonstrates the value of tapping into expertise. Imagine trying to figure out all this stuff on your own, and all of the work and effort that Jose has put into figuring this out. You can tap into that and use that expertise instead of trying to figure out over the course of a month on your weekends what Jose has figured out for you. So if it's one thing, Jose, that if I could go back to my 25-year-old self, right, and learn a lesson, it's, man, I would have used a lot more outside expertise to help me, right? Because we all have egos, right? It's like, I'll figure this all out myself.
A lot.
Right? So if you want to tap into this training, you can go to the EAS site, use the promo code Bryan when you're checking out, and they'll give you 15% off. So, I mean, that's really cool of EAS to do that, and I appreciate that. So take advantage of that and use expertise and learn from these things, which is why we do these food safety chats, right? We want to share this information and help because we're all in this together. And food safety is a collaborative effort. And we're just glad that you chose to come here and join us on a Friday and learn from experts like Jose in these areas and use this now. So take this data of what we're showing you and apply it, right? Because if it's not applied, it doesn't do you any good. So we'll be back here next Friday. We have the food safety chat every Friday. So the next one will be, the 5th of November. And we live stream on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter every day at the same time on Friday. So 8 a.m. Mountain, my time, 10 a.m. Eastern. And we will see you back here next Friday. And thank you, Jose, for all of this work. I mean, this is amazing. I know everybody appreciates it like I do. And I hope you have a great weekend, my friend, and have a safe Halloween.
And you too. And everybody.
Thank you. We
have a great day.